Lucia Vega froze mid-polish as billionaire tech CEO Victor Reeves waved a document in Mandarin before his executive team, her secret fluency burning in her throat like a fire she'd been taught to suppress her entire life. The mahogany conference table gleamed under her cloth, reflecting the faces of men and women who had never once truly looked at her, in the 5 years she'd been cleaning their offices. Anyone who can translate this acquisition proposal gets my salary for a day, $27,400. Reeves announced, his voice dripping with the casual arrogance of a man who had never worried about money a single day in his life. He nudged aside Lucia's cleaning cart with his Italian leather shoe, the kind that cost more than her monthly rent, treating her equipment like an inconvenient obstacle rather than the tools of an honest living. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. The conference room erupted in laughter as executives exchanged knowing glances, their amusement creating an invisible wall that separated them from the woman in the cleaning uniform standing just feet away. Lucia kept her eyes down, years of practiced invisibility guiding her movements as she focused on the circular motion of her cloth against the polished wood. Each stroke was deliberate, methodical, a meditation that kept her breathing steady even as her heart raced with possibilities and fears. "Maybe we should just use Google Translate," joked Derek Willis, VP of Operations, his Harvard-class ring clinking against his water glass with a sound that somehow managed to convey both his privilege and his ignorance. His comment drew more laughter from the room, a chorus of voices that had never wondered what it was like to work 3 jobs just to keep a roof over your head. Probably more reliable than whatever discount service we'd get otherwise. The words stung, not because they were directed at Lucia specifically, but because they revealed how little these people understood about the world beyond their executive suites. Discount service, as if quality and cost were always inversely proportional, as if the woman cleaning their conference room couldn't possibly possess skills that rivaled their own. Lucia's phone vibrated in her pocket, a cruel reminder of the eviction notice sitting on her kitchen table. 72 hours before the court hearing that could leave her family homeless, 72 hours before everything she'd worked for, everything she'd sacrificed, would mean nothing. The numbers burned in her mind with the clarity of panic. $25,000, the exact amount standing between dignity and desperation, between having a home and living on the streets. Her fingers closed around the jade translator's pen in her pocket, its smooth surface, worn from years of being carried everywhere she went, her father's final gift, purchased during better times when he still believed the world rewarded hard work and talent regardless of packaging. A skill hidden, a heritage denied, a chance dangling before her like a lifeline extended over a cliff's edge. Would revealing her true self to those who looked through her bring salvation or merely new humiliation? The question hung in the air like a prophecy as she slipped from the room, invisible once more, her mind already racing through calculations and consequences. $27,000, more money than she'd ever held at once, enough to change everything. But at what cost? Lucia hadn't always been invisible. 15 years ago, she was the bright-eyed 8-year-old who amazed her teachers by switching effortlessly between 3 languages, moving from English to Spanish to Mandarin with the fluid grace of someone for whom borders existed only on maps, not in the mind. Her linguistic abilities weren't just impressive, they were natural, as instinctive as breathing. Her Chinese mother, Min, had met her Dominican father, Rafael, at an international student exchange program in Boston, back when both still believed that love and hard work could overcome any obstacle. Their love story had flourished despite cultural differences, bound by a shared passion for languages and education that transcended the prejudices and practical concerns their families raised. Min's parents worried about their daughter marrying outside the culture. Raphael's family questioned whether he was ready to take on the responsibilities of an intercultural marriage. But love, especially young love fortified by shared dreams, rarely listens to practical concerns. "Words build bridges between worlds," Raphael would tell Lucia, his voice gentle but passionate as he taught her to write characters that danced across the page like small pieces of art. His study, a converted second bedroom, in their modest apartment, smelled of books and sandalwood incense, a mingling of scents that represented the blending of worlds that defined their family. When you can speak someone's language, when you truly understand not just the words but the culture behind them, you hold something precious. You hold the power to connect people who might otherwise remain strangers. By 10 years old, Lucia could translate complex conversations between her Chinese grandparents and Dominican relatives, earning proud smiles from both sides of her family. She became the bridge her father had spoken of, the living embodiment of two cultures meeting and creating something entirely new. Family gatherings transformed from awkward, gesture-filled affairs into genuine connections, with Lucia facilitating conversations about recipes, history, politics, and dreams. Her grandmothers, who initially struggled to find common ground, became close friends through their shared granddaughter's translations, comparing notes on raising children in difficult times and sharing stories of their own struggles. The jade translator's pen had been her 13th birthday gift, arriving in a wooden box lined with red silk, cool and weighty in her palm. Its smooth surface was interrupted only by carved characters spelling "Knowledge illuminates," a phrase her father explained had been the motto of the scholar who had originally owned the pen generations ago. When she held it close, she could smell the faint sandalwood scent of her father's study where they'd spent countless hours poring over texts in multiple languages. Him explaining not just what words meant, but why they mattered. How language shaped thought and culture shaped perspective. This pen belonged to a great scholar, her father had explained, his eyes shining with the pride only a parent can feel when seeing their child embrace their heritage. A man who believed that understanding between cultures wasn't just possible, but essential. Now it belongs to another great scholar, one who will use it to build even more bridges than I ever could. Lucia had treasured that pen, using it to take notes in her advanced language classes, carrying it to the citywide translation competition where she'd taken first place, bringing it to her acceptance interview for the linguistic scholarship that would have paid for her entire undergraduate education at Georgetown University. The future had seemed limitless then, a vast landscape of possibilities stretching out before her like an open road. 3 months after that birthday, everything changed. Rafael Vega was laid off from Reeves Enterprises during what the company euphemistically called a strategic restructuring. The reality behind the corporate speak was brutally simple. Victor Reeves had decided that quarterly profits mattered more than people, that stockholders deserved returns, even if achieving those returns meant destroying lives and careers. After 15 years of developing the company's Asian market partnerships, after learning Mandarin to fluency on his own time and building relationships with Chinese business leaders that had generated millions in revenue, Raphael was discarded with a severance package that barely covered 2 months' rent. The health insurance disappeared overnight, a fact that seemed merely unfortunate at the time, but would soon reveal itself as catastrophic. When the persistent cough that Raphael had attributed to seasonal allergies turned out to be stage 4 lung cancer, the medical bills accumulated faster than the rejection letters from his job applications. Lucia remembered with perfect, painful clarity the night her father had returned from an interview at a competitor company. His face ashen, his hands trembling as he poured himself a glass of water he couldn't quite manage to drink. "They can't hire me," he'd whispered to Min, thinking Lucia was asleep in the next room but not realizing she was. Listening through the thin walls of their apartment, her heart breaking with each word. "Reeves has blackballed me throughout the industry. Something about proprietary knowledge, about non-compete clauses that don't actually exist in my severance agreement but that he's claiming anyway. He's called everyone I've interviewed with. I'm untouchable." The jade pen had been in Lucia's hand when she heard those words, and she'd gripped it so tightly the carved characters pressed into her palm, leaving temporary indentations that felt like they should have been permanent. Her father, the man who had taught her that knowledge illuminates, was being erased from his field by someone who couldn't see past quarterly earnings reports. 6 months later, Raphael was gone, leaving behind $43,756 in medical debt that no amount of bridge building or language skills could translate away. He left behind a heartbroken family trying to understand how someone who had given so much to a company could be discarded so easily. And he left behind a jade pen that Lucia now carried everywhere, no longer just a symbol of her heritage but a physical reminder of her father's dreams and the system that had crushed them. Min took on 3 housekeeping jobs, working from dawn until well past dusk. Her engineering degree from Beijing University rendered useless without American credentials or, more importantly, without the connections and resources needed to get those credentials recognized. The woman who had once designed components for satellite systems now cleaned the offices where such designs were created, invisible to the engineers who had no idea that the woman emptying their trash bins understood their equations better than they did. Lucia's dream of the linguistic scholarship evaporated when Min's first stroke hit, forcing the 17-year-old to abandon her senior year of high school 3 months before graduation. The school counselor had tried to convince her to finish, talking about how close she was, how much she'd already achieved. But numbers don't care about potential or achievement. They cared about the immediate crisis of her mother lying in a hospital bed, unable to move her left side, with medical bills that made her father's final debts look modest by comparison. Now, at 23 years old, Lucia's days followed a punishing rhythm that would have broken most people within months. She cleaned offices at Reeves Enterprises from 4 in the afternoon until midnight, moving through gleaming hallways and executive suites like a ghost, acknowledged only when she missed a spot or accidentally interrupted an important meeting. Then she would drive home to care for her partially paralyzed mother until dawn, helping Min with medications, physical therapy exercises, bathing, dressing, and the thousand small tasks that dignity requires but disability makes difficult. After getting her mother settled and comfortable, Lucia would grab perhaps 3 hours of sleep if she was lucky, often less if Min had a bad night. Then, from 8 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, she would translate academic papers online under the pseudonym Linguistic Bridge, turning complex research from Mandarin to English or Spanish to English, working at a laptop in their cramped apartment while her mother slept in the next room. The anonymous translation work paid $22 per hour, significantly better than her cleaning job's $14.25. But the clients were inconsistent, sometimes flooding her with work, other times leaving her with nothing for weeks at a time, and revealing her real identity risked exposing her to the same system that had destroyed her father. If Reeves Enterprises discovered that their cleaning woman was also one of the most skilled Mandarin translators in the region, capable of handling technical and business documents that their own high-priced translation teams struggled with, they would either exploit that knowledge or fire her for some manufactured reason. Either way, she would lose the health insurance coverage her mother desperately needed, 60 hours of work each week, sometimes 70 if translation projects piled up. Every month brought the same crushing arithmetic. $2,000 for rent on their one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that was barely safe, but was all they could afford. $463 for her mother's medications, the ones insurance didn't cover fully. $275 for the payment plan on her father's medical debt, a burden she'd inherited along with his jade pen and his shattered dreams. $190 for groceries, carefully planned and budgeted down to the can of beans. $145 for utilities, kept as low as possible by wearing sweaters in winter and suffering through summer heat. The arithmetic of survival left nothing for savings, nothing for emergencies, and certainly nothing for the kind of life a 23-year-old should be living. While her former classmates posted pictures from college parties and spring break trips, Lucia counted pills and calculated whether she could afford to replace her worn-out work shoes or if they had another month left in them. For 5 years, Lucia had moved through Reeves Enterprises like a ghost among the living, emptying trash bins filled with the detritus of billion-dollar deals, wiping down conference tables where decisions affecting thousands of lives were made without a second thought. She'd learned early to make herself invisible, to become part of the furniture so thoroughly overlooked that executives spoke freely about confidential matters with her in the room, never once considering that the cleaning woman might understand, might even care about their corporate strategies and personal dramas, but her ears caught everything. Her fluency in Mandarin, Spanish, and English transformed what was meaningless background noise for others into valuable intelligence, a constant stream of information about the company's inner workings, its secrets, its hypocrisies. Strategic acquisitions discussed in Mandarin conference calls, assuming no one outside their circle could understand. Product launches debated in Spanish, targeting Hispanic markets while employing no Hispanic executives. Personnel changes, layoffs planned months in advance, bonuses awarded to executives even as frontline workers saw their hours cut. She knew that Victor Reeves had cut employee retirement contributions by 3% while simultaneously purchasing a $14.2 million vacation home in Aspen. The announcement about necessary belt-tightening and fiscal responsibility had been made the same week his real estate broker visited the office to finalize papers for the mountain estate. She knew that Derek Willis had taken full credit for the Singapore expansion strategy that junior analyst Priya Sharma had actually developed, presenting her work as his own at a board meeting while Priya sat in her cubicle, unaware that her career-making idea was being stolen in real time. Willis had received a promotion and a 6-figure bonus. Sharma had been laid off 3 months later during another round of strategic restructuring. She knew the company's public commitment to diversity and inclusion masked systemic wage gaps that would have caused a scandal if anyone bothered to compile the data. The maintenance staff was 87% people of color, working for wages that barely met the poverty line. Executive leadership was 94% white, with salaries and bonuses that could have supported dozens of families. The diversity committee met quarterly in the very conference room Lucia cleaned, congratulating themselves on their commitment to equity while she wiped fingerprints from water glasses that cost more than her weekly grocery budget. Knowledge without power intelligence without opportunity. Lucia cleaned their coffee rings while understanding every word they said about Asian markets, Hispanic consumers, and untapped multilingual demographics. She bit her tongue while they discussed strategies for reaching diverse communities, without ever considering that the diverse communities were already in the building, invisible in uniforms, speaking languages they didn't bother to learn, possessing skills they never thought to ask about. The irony wasn't lost on her, but irony didn't pay bills or prevent evictions. Irony didn't help her mother regain the use of her left arm or erase medical debt accumulated from a system that valued profit over people. Irony was just another luxury she couldn't afford. And now the 72-hour countdown had begun, ticking away with the relentless precision of a clock that didn't care about circumstances or struggles. Her mother's disability appeal had been denied again, the third time in 2 years, with the same form letter citing the same bureaucratic reasons that translated to, "We don't want to help you." The final eviction notice would be processed Monday morning at 9 o'clock, initiating a legal process that would end with their belongings on the sidewalk and their names on a list that would make renting anywhere else nearly impossible. Without $25,000 for back rent and legal fees, money that might as well have been $25 million for all the possibilities she had of obtaining it, they would join the invisible ranks of the displaced, those who built cities without being welcomed by them, who cleaned offices and stocked shelves and cared for children, and kept the infrastructure of civilization functioning while being treated as if they were the ones failing, the ones not trying hard enough, the ones who simply needed to pull themselves up by bootstraps they'd never been given. The document appeared on Victor Reeves's desk at precisely 10:17 on Friday morning. Lucia noticed its arrival because she was polishing the glass trophy case nearby, a display of awards and recognitions that celebrated the company's success without mentioning the workers who'd made that success possible. She was close enough to see the Shanghai postmark, close enough to recognize the logo of Huang Tech Innovations, one of China's largest semiconductor manufacturers, and a company her father had helped Reeves Enterprises establish a relationship with years ago. She also noticed something the executives wouldn't have recognized, the slight tremor in Reeves's usually steady hands as he opened the envelope. The momentary flicker of panic that crossed his perpetually composed face before he schooled his expression back into its usual mask of confidence and control. Whatever that document contained, it was important, more than important, critical. By noon, the executive floor was in chaos, though calling it chaos was perhaps generous. It was more like controlled panic, the kind of crisis that happens when people accustomed to having solutions at their fingertips suddenly find themselves helpless. Urgent meeting notifications pinged across monitors in rapid succession. Email chains multiplied like digital wildfire. Phone calls were made with increasing desperation. The translation team was scrambled, which really meant that Reeves's assistant called their offices expecting them to drop everything and appear instantly. Then came the bad news, delivered in hushed, worried tones that Lucia overheard while supposedly organizing cleaning supplies in the hallway. Lin, the head translator, was in Beijing visiting family for his daughter's wedding, an event scheduled months ago that Reeves had approved without bothering to note on any calendar that mattered. His two associates were at an industry conference in Tokyo, presenting papers on technical translation that were supposed to enhance the company's reputation and expertise. Lucia emptied waste baskets methodically, moving through the commotion like a shadow, like water flowing around stones. Years of practice had perfected her ability to be present without being noticed, to move through spaces as if she were part of the air itself. She should have left when the chaos began. Her shift technically ended at noon on Fridays, one small mercy in a schedule that offered few, but curiosity kept her there. Or perhaps it was fate, or perhaps it was simply the desperate instinct of someone drowning who sees something that might be a lifeline. She lingered, wiping down already clean surfaces with unnecessary attention to detail, her movements automatic while her mind raced. As the executives assembled in the conference room, she found reasons to be nearby. A water stain on the hallway mirror, dust on the plant leaves, the trash bin that didn't really need emptying yet, but could be emptied anyway. Victor Reeves burst from his office with the energy of a man accustomed to solving problems through force of will and unlimited resources, neither of which seemed to be working for him now. "Everyone in the conference room, now!" His tone left no room for questions or delays. Lucia positioned herself at the far end of the conference room, technically present to maintain the space, but positioned where she could hear everything while appearing to focus on her tasks. The executives filed in with varying degrees of curiosity and concern, sensing that something significant was happening but not yet understanding what. Reeves slammed the document onto the table with enough force to make the water glasses tremble. "Huang is offering us exclusive manufacturing rights for our new AI processor. This could double our market share in Asia. This isn't just a good opportunity, it's potentially the biggest deal this company has seen in a decade. Derek Willis, ever ready to state the obvious while missing the problem, ventured, "That's fantastic news." The confusion was evident in his voice, his inability to read the room showing why his success had more to do with privilege than perceptiveness. "It would be," Reeves snapped, his frustration breaking through his usual corporate composure. "If we could read the damn thing. They've sent it entirely in Mandarin, not just the cover letter, but every single page of technical specifications and terms, and our entire translation team is conveniently unavailable. Huang wants a response in 72 hours, or they're taking the deal to Samsung. 72 hours to review, comprehend, and respond to the most complex business proposal we've received all year." Lucia's heart quickened as her mind automatically began translating the characters visible on the cover page before she consciously decided to look. Technical terms her father had taught her, specifications for semiconductor manufacturing processes, the formal business language that bridged cultures. The words were already forming in her mind. Translations that she knew would be more accurate than anything Google Translate could produce, more nuanced than a basic translation service would offer. This wasn't just a business deal. This was her father's legacy, calling out from a document written in a language he'd taught her. Huang Tech had been one of Rafael Vega's success stories, a relationship he'd cultivated over years of patient work, careful cultural navigation, and genuine respect. He'd believed that business worked best when it was built on understanding, when partners spoke the same language literally and figuratively. And now that relationship, that bridge he'd built, was offering an opportunity to the company that had discarded him. She thought of the jade pen in her pocket, smooth and cool against her palm through the fabric of her uniform. She thought of her mother struggling with physical therapy exercises that might never restore what the stroke had taken. She thought of the eviction notice on their kitchen table, its deadline as immovable as death itself. She thought of her father's voice, "Words build bridges between worlds." But she also thought of Derek Willis's casual dismissal of discount services. She thought of 5 years of invisibility, of being looked through rather than looked at. She thought of the wage gaps and the stolen credit and the systemic devaluation of people who looked like her, who spoke languages like hers, who came from families like hers. What would happen if she revealed what she could do? Would they thank her and pay her fairly? Or would they take her translation, pay her the same $14.25 an hour they always did, and send her back to cleaning toilets while they took all the credit and all the profit? Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. The room erupted with suggestions, each more impractical than the last. Online translation services that would mangle technical terminology, rush orders to translation agencies that charge premium rates for inferior work, conference calls with translators who might miss crucial cultural nuances. Everyone had an idea, no one had a solution. Lucia watched them flail, these powerful people who controlled so much but understood so little. Part of her, a part she wasn't proud of but couldn't entirely suppress, enjoyed their helplessness. They were experiencing a fraction of what she felt every day, the frustration of having a problem you couldn't solve, of needing help you couldn't afford, of watching opportunities slip away because of circumstances beyond your control. But another part of her, the part that still believed in her father's ideals despite everything that had happened, knew that this moment was bigger than revenge or satisfaction. This was the bridge her father had spoken of, the connection between worlds that he'd spent his life building. The document sitting on that table wasn't just a business deal. It was a legacy, a test, and perhaps a chance at redemption for both her family and the company that had wronged them. Reeves's frustration was escalating, his usual corporate polish cracking under pressure. "We can't afford to lose this deal. Huang specifically requested us because of our previous relationship with them. If we can't even manage to read their proposal, we'll look incompetent. Worse than incompetent, we'll look disrespectful of their culture and language." Lucia's mind raced through scenarios, calculations of risk and reward that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with dignity. If she stayed silent, her family would lose their apartment. If she spoke up, she might lose something harder to define, but equally important, the small shield of invisibility that had protected her from exploitation and disappointment. The jade pen seemed to pulse in her pocket, a phantom heartbeat that reminded her of everything it represented. Her father had carried this pen when he built bridges. Her father had believed that talent and hard work would be recognized and rewarded. Her father had been wrong about the fairness of the world, but perhaps he'd been right about the power of courage. Lucia's hands stilled on the cleaning cloth she'd been using. In the reflection of the polished mahogany table, she caught sight of her own face, young and uncertain but no longer entirely invisible. For 5 years, she'd perfected the art of not being seen. Perhaps it was time to perfect the art of being undeniable. She took a breath that felt like it contained all the air in the world and all the courage she'd ever need. Her voice, unused to speaking in these rooms except to apologize or confirm cleaning schedules, sounded strange in her own ears as she said the words that would change everything. "Excuse me, Mr. Reeves, I can translate it." The room fell silent, not the comfortable silence of people thinking, but the shocked silence of people confronting something that doesn't fit their understanding of how the world works. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward her, some confused, some annoyed, none quite registering what they'd just heard. Reeves looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, despite the countless hours she'd spent cleaning his office, emptying his trash, making his workspace presentable while he built his empire. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Lucia lifted her chin, a gesture of defiance her mother had taught her, a refusal to shrink that her father had modeled. "The document, I can translate it from Mandarin to English, including all technical specifications and cultural nuances. I'm fluent." Derek Willis actually laughed, a sharp bark of disbelief that made several other executives smile uncomfortably. "The cleaning woman speaks Mandarin? Sure, and I speak fluent Martian." But Reeves wasn't laughing, he was calculating, his sharp business mind already running through the implications of what Lucia had just claimed. She could see the wheels turning. If she was telling the truth, he had a solution to his crisis. If she was lying or exaggerating, he'd lost nothing but 5 minutes. "You can read this?" He held up the document, its dense characters visible on the first page. Lucia stepped forward, no longer invisible, no longer content to remain in the shadows. She took the document from his hands, feeling the expensive paper stock, seeing her father's professional legacy in every character. Her eyes scanned the opening paragraph, and words she'd learned at her father's knee flowed naturally into English. The document begins, "To the esteemed leadership of Reeves Enterprises, greetings from Huang Tech Innovations. We write to propose a partnership built on mutual respect and technological advancement. Following the foundation established by the late Lucia Vega, whose vision for international cooperation continues to guide our approach to Western partnerships." She paused, letting the weight of her father's name settle in the room like a ghost demanding recognition. The silence this time was different. It was the silence of assumptions crumbling, of worldviews adjusting to accommodate new information. Derek Willis had stopped smiling. Victor Reeves was staring at her with an intensity that made her want to step back, but she held her ground. "Where did you learn Mandarin?" Reeves asked, his tone now all business, the mocking disbelief replaced by sharp curiosity. "From my father," Lucia said simply, holding his gaze even though every instinct screamed at her to look down, to make herself small again. "Rafael Vega. He worked here for 15 years before you laid him off. He was the one who established your relationship with Huang Tech in the first place. He taught me Mandarin from the time I could speak. He believed that language was a bridge, and he wanted me to be a bridge. Builder." The name landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of recognition across faces that had long forgotten the man they'd discarded. Reeves' expression shifted, something that might have been memory or might have been discomfort flickering across his features before he locked it down. "Rafael Vega," he repeated slowly, as if testing the weight of the past. "I remember. He was competent. The layoffs were necessary for company restructuring." Lucia felt rage surge through her veins like fire, hot and consuming, and almost impossible to contain. Competent, necessary, sanitized corporate language that erased a man's life, his contributions, his death from treatable illness because he'd lost insurance during necessary restructuring. But she couldn't afford rage right now. She needed calculation, strategy, the same cold business logic these people valued above humanity. "Yes," she said, keeping her voice steady through force of will. "He was competent, and his competence established relationships that are still benefiting this company a decade after you fired him. Huang is reaching out because my father treated them with respect and cultural understanding. They remember him even if you've forgotten." The accusation hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Derek Willis looked like he wanted to object, to reassert the hierarchy that Lucia was disrupting, but Reeves held up a hand. "Can you really translate this entire document accurately, including technical specifications? Give me 2 hours, and I'll have the first 10 pages done. If my translation is accurate and complete, we can discuss terms for the rest." "Terms?" Willis sputtered. "You work for us. Your terms are whatever we decide to pay you." Lucia turned to him, this man who had stolen credit and collected bonuses while contributing nothing of real value. "I work as a cleaning person for $14.25 an hour. Translation services, especially technical translation. with tight deadlines, typically cost between $100 and $200 per page. This document is approximately 80 pages. You want my terms, or do you want to explain to Huang why you couldn't be bothered to read their proposal? The math was suddenly very clear to everyone in the room. Standard translation services would cost between $8,000 and $16,000. Assuming they could even find someone available on such short notice who could handle the technical content, Lucia was offering to do it for, "What? I want what you offered," Lucia continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Your daily salary, $27,400, 1 day of what you earn for weeks of what I earn. I'll translate the entire document, accurately and completely within 48 hours. You'll have time to review and respond with 24 hours to spare." "That's ridiculous," Willis objected. "We're not paying cleaning staff executive salaries for a few hours of work. It's not a few hours of work. It's years of education, cultural knowledge, and linguistic expertise. It's a skill that's desperately needed and conveniently available, and it's significantly less than you'd pay for rush translation services, assuming you could even find them." Lucia paused, then played her final card. "It's also your only option, so you can pay what amounts to a bargain, or you can watch the opportunity your company needs walk over to Samsung." Reeves was silent, his calculating gaze moving between the document and Lucia, weighing options, assessing risks. She could see him doing the math, the business calculation divorced from emotion or fairness. $27,000 versus millions in potential revenue. A cleaning woman with unexpected skills versus the continued success of his company. 2 hours, he finally said. "Prove you can do what you claim. If the translation is accurate and usable, we'll discuss payment." It wasn't agreement, but it was an opening. Lucia nodded once, took the document, and walked out of the conference room with her head high. Behind her, she could hear the explosion of conversation, the shocked voices debating what had just happened. But she didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't allow herself to feel anything except the weight of the document in her hands and the jade pen in her pocket. She found an empty office, one of the small rooms used for private calls and confidential work. She closed the door, sat at the desk, and pulled out her father's pen. For a moment she just held it, feeling the connection to him, to his dreams, to the bridges he'd believed in. Then she began to translate, her father's teachings flowing through her hands as she turned dense technical Mandarin into clear, precise English. Each character was a conversation with her past, each sentence a validation of skills that had been invisible for too long. She worked with the focused intensity of someone who knows that everything rides on this moment. That failure isn't an option because there are no second chances. 2 hours later, Lucia returned to the conference room with 10 pages of translation. The executives had remained, ordering lunch in, their usual meetings cancelled as they waited to see if the impossible might actually be possible. They looked up as she entered, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and hope. She handed the pages to Reeves without a word. He scanned the first page, his expression neutral. Then he read more carefully, his eyes narrowing with concentration. He passed pages to the other executives, who read with growing attention. Derek Willis pulled out his phone, presumably to check something against online translation tools. His expression shifted from smug confidence to confused concern to grudging acceptance. This is actually good. Better than good. The terminology is perfect. The structure maintains formality while being clear." One of the other executives, a woman named Patricia Chen, who handled Asian market development, leaned forward. "You've included contextual notes explaining cultural references. This isn't just translation, it's cultural interpretation. This is exactly what we need." Reeves set down the pages and looked at Lucia with an expression she couldn't quite read. Respect, calculation, regret, perhaps all three. "This is professional-grade work. Where have you been hiding this skill?" "I haven't been hiding it," Lucia said quietly. "You never asked, you never looked. For 5 years, I've worked in this building. Invisible to everyone except when you needed something cleaned. You've discussed Chinese market strategies while I emptied your trash. You've complained about translation delays while I was standing right there. You've never once wondered if the people around you might have skills beyond what you hired them for." The words hung in the air, an indictment that no one could quite refute because it was simply undeniably true. Patricia Chen had the grace to look ashamed. Derek Willis looked defensive. Victor Reeves looked like he was recalculating everything he thought he knew. "The full document," Reeves said, bringing the conversation back to business because business was safer than uncomfortable truths. 48 hours, $27,400, but I want cultural notes throughout, not just basic translation. I want you to flag anything that might have different implications in Chinese business culture. I want the kind of comprehensive understanding that will let us respond appropriately and build on this relationship." "Agreed," Lucia said. "I'll need access to a private office and a computer with Chinese character support, and I want the payment in writing before I start." You don't trust us? Willis asked, sounding offended. Lucia looked at him steadily. You fired my father, blackballed him from the industry, and let him die bankrupt from medical bills. Then you kept me cleaning your offices for 5 years at minimum wage, while discussing strategies I could have contributed to. So, no, I don't trust you. I trust contracts. Reeves actually smiled at that, a thin expression that might have been approval of her business sense. Fair enough. My assistant will draft a contract. You'll have it within the hour. Lucia worked through the night, translating page after page of technical specifications, business terms, and cultural nuances. The document was complex, requiring not just linguistic skill, but deep understanding of semiconductor manufacturing, international business law, and the subtle ways Chinese business communication conveyed meaning through formality levels and word choice. Her father's voice echoed in her mind as she worked, guiding her through difficult passages, reminding her of principles and precedents. This wasn't just translation, this was a conversation across languages, cultures, and the divide between the living and the dead. She was finishing the bridge her father had started building, completing work that his death had left incomplete. By Saturday evening, exhausted but determined, she had finished. 80 pages of dense technical content, transformed into clear English with extensive cultural notes explaining the implications of word choices, the significance of formality levels, the unspoken expectations embedded in business communication. It was, she knew without false modesty, exceptional work, the kind of translation that transcended mere word conversion and created genuine understanding. She delivered the complete translation to Reeves's email with copies to Patricia Chen and the legal department. Then she went home, checked on her mother who was sleeping peacefully, and allowed herself to feel for the first time in days the money would arrive Monday. $27,400. Enough to pay the back rent and legal fees with money left over. Enough to breathe for the first time in years. Enough to prove that her father's teachings had value, that her skills mattered, that invisibility had been a choice forced upon her, but not an inherent condition. Monday morning brought new shocks. Reeves called an emergency meeting, and this time he specifically requested Lucia's presence. Not as cleaning staff, but as a consultant. The terms had changed. She entered the conference room to find not just company executives, but a video conference call with representatives from Huang Tech. Her heart stopped as she recognized one of the faces on the screen. Huang Wei himself, the CEO, a man her father had worked with years ago. Ms. Vega, Huang said warmly in Mandarin, it is an honor to see Rafael Vega's daughter continuing his legacy. Your translation was exemplary. More importantly, your cultural notes demonstrated the kind of deep understanding that made your father such a valued partner. When we sent this proposal, we hoped to test whether Reeves Enterprises still valued the principles your father embodied. Your work has answered that question beautifully, Lucia responded in Mandarin, thanking him for his words and his company's continued respect for her father's memory. As she spoke, she was aware of the executives watching, most of them unable to understand the words, but clearly recognizing that something significant was happening. If you were in Lucia's position right now, finally being recognized for your true abilities after years of being overlooked, what would you say? Drop your thoughts in the comments, Huang continued, now switching to English for the benefit of the others. However, I must be transparent about our expectations going forward. This partnership will require ongoing cultural consultation and translation services. We need someone who understands both the technical content and the cultural context. Ms. Vega, your work has shown you possess both. We would like you to be the primary liaison for this partnership. Victor Reeves's jaw actually tightened, a sign that he was being backed into a corner but couldn't see a way out. He'd been outmaneuvered by a man who'd used cultural expectations and business leverage to force recognition of Lucia's value. With the deadline minutes away and millions at stake, he had no choice but to agree. Fine, he conceded, his tone making it clear that the decision was being forced upon him, but that he understood the business necessity. Ms. Vega will oversee the cultural aspects of the implementation. The video call concluded with Huang expressing his pleasure at finding Rafael Vega's legacy alive at Reeves Enterprises, his words carefully chosen to remind everyone that this partnership was built on foundations that predated their current relationship. As the executives dispersed, processing what had just happened and what it meant for their company's hierarchy, Victor Reeves approached Lucia with an expression that was difficult to read. It seems I underestimated you, he said, the closest thing to an apology she was likely to receive from a man like him. Many people do, Lucia replied simply, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. It's one of the advantages of being underestimated. You learn to recognize genuine opportunities when they appear because you know you won't get second chances. Reeves nodded slowly, then did something Lucia hadn't expected. He pulled out his checkbook, the old-fashioned kind that executives still carried for moments when electronic transfers seemed insufficiently formal, and wrote a check for $27,400, his daily salary, exactly as promised. "Our agreement stands," he said, handing her the check, "though it appears you've earned considerably more than that." Lucia took the check, feeling the weight of it, the validation it represented. But before she could respond, Reeves's assistant entered with a printed email. The CEO read it quickly, and something like surprise crossed his features. "Huang has made one final request," he said, looking at Lucia with renewed calculation. "A $50,000 signing bonus, specifically designated for cultural consultancy services provided by Lucia Vega. They've built it into the partnership agreement as a non-negotiable term." Lucia felt the world tilt slightly. $77,400, more money than she'd ever held at once, more than enough to save her mother's medical care, to stop the eviction, to pay down debt, to breathe for the first time in years. "They value your father's legacy," Reeves continued, "and they're making it clear that this partnership depends on your continued involvement. I'm going to need you to transition out of housekeeping and into a formal position. We'll need to discuss salary, benefits, and role definition." As cameras recorded the official contract signing for company, records creating documentation of a moment that would be used in press releases and investor presentations, Lucia held the jade pen in her hand. No longer a burden of the past, no longer a secret talisman carried in pockets and hidden from view. Now it was a key to her future, a bridge between the world her father had dreamed of and the world she was going to build. 6 months later, Lucia sat in her new office, and the view from her floor-to-ceiling windows offered a perspective of the city that she'd never imagined experiencing. Director of International Relations at Reeves Enterprises. The title still felt surreal sometimes, like a dream she might wake from at any moment, but the polished walnut desk was real, solid under her hands. The framed photo of her mother was real, showing Min smiling broadly, her left arm showing remarkable improvement from the intensive physical therapy that quality health insurance had finally made possible. The jade translator's pen rested in a small crystal stand on her desk, its polished surface catching the morning light and throwing small rainbows across the papers scattered around it. When she held it now, the sandalwood scent mingled with the fresh orchids she kept beside her father's photograph, creating a sensory connection that linked past and present, loss and achievement, grief and hope. Her office was more than just a workspace. It was a statement, a claim to space in a building where she'd once been relegated to service corridors and supply closets. 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood with actual parking, and a doorman who greeted her by name. Specialized medical care for her mother at a facility close enough for daily visits. Financial breathing room that allowed for things like savings accounts and retirement contributions, and the occasional luxury of eating at restaurants without calculating every dollar. Her first official act as director had been establishing a scholarship fund for employees' children, named the Rafael Vega Memorial Scholarship for Multilingual Achievement. The program provided financial support for higher education to children of working-class employees, with preference given to students pursuing linguistic or cultural studies. 5 students had already received funding, their thank you letters hanging on her office wall as reminders of why this work mattered. Her second act had been implementing a comprehensive review of the company's layoff policies, creating protections that would prevent the kind of arbitrary termination that had destroyed her father. The new policies required extensive documentation, multiple levels of approval, and severance packages that actually reflected years of service rather than corporate convenience. It wasn't enough to undo the past, but it might prevent future families from experiencing what hers had endured. The third initiative had been the most personally satisfying, rehiring workers from her community with proper benefits and creating language-appropriate training materials. The housekeeping staff now included several people with advanced degrees who'd been unable to crack into their fields. The company provided English classes, professional development opportunities, and clear paths to advancement. 3 former cleaning staff members had already transitioned into administrative and technical roles. The contract she'd negotiated with Huang Tech had increased Reeves's Asian market share by 32% in 2 quarters, generating revenues that exceeded even the most optimistic projections. The board members, who had once looked through her as if she were transparent, now addressed her as Ms. Vega, with the same deference once reserved for executives whose last names appeared on university buildings and charity foundations. Even Victor Reeves had developed what might generously be called respect for her, though it was respect born from pragmatism rather than principle. He recognized the arithmetic of her value, the simple calculation that her cultural insights and linguistic precision had opened doors previously closed to the company. As he'd put it in the last shareholders' meeting, employing the kind of corporate speak that said everything and nothing, Ms. Vega's unique perspective has proven unexpectedly valuable. Lucia had smiled when she'd heard that, amused by how I was completely wrong about her and my prejudices nearly cost the company millions, translated into unexpectedly valuable in executive language. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in the story and share your thoughts in the comments. Her assistant knocked gently, pulling Lucia from her thoughts. The assistant was a recent hire, a young woman named Sarah whose previous work experience had been limited to retail and food service, but whose organizational skills and attention to detail had impressed Lucia during the interview. Your mother's physical therapist called. She wanted you to know the improvements are continuing ahead of schedule. They're optimistic about regaining another 15% mobility in her left arm. Gracias, Lucia answered, allowing herself the small pleasure of using Spanish openly in these halls where she'd once hidden her multilingual identity. The word felt like a reclamation of self, a refusal to minimize her heritage for the comfort of others. Her phone chimed with a calendar reminder. The monthly board meeting in 15 minutes. 6 months ago, she had been invisible in that room, wiping fingerprints from water glasses while executives made decisions that affected thousands of lives without considering those lives as anything more than numbers on spreadsheets. Today, she would present her international expansion strategy. A comprehensive plan projected to create 450 new jobs across multiple countries and increase company valuation by 18%. As she gathered her materials, her gaze fell on a newspaper clipping framed beside her father's photo. The business section headline read, Reeves Enterprises stock soars on Asian partnership. New director credits immigrant father's legacy. The article highlighted her unconventional rise from maintenance staff to executive leadership, with industry analysts praising the company's unexpected talent discovery as a potential model for corporate diversity initiatives. What the article didn't mention, what no press release could capture, was the 28 other maintenance and support staff members who had been promoted after Lucia implemented her Hidden Talents initiative. This company-wide program encouraged employees at all levels to document their skills, education, and aspirations, creating a database that human resources could reference when positions opened. The former security guard with an engineering degree from Nigeria now worked in the product development department, his insights into African market needs already influencing design decisions. The cafeteria worker, who spoke 5 languages, had been hired into customer service management, her linguistic abilities finally recognized as valuable rather than merely interesting. The IT help desk technician, with an untapped gift for product design, had moved into the user experience team, her fresh perspective challenging assumptions that insiders had accepted without question. Each promotion represented someone who had been invisible becoming visible, someone whose potential had been ignored finally being recognized. Lucia knew that her own transformation was only meaningful if it opened doors for others, if her bridge building extended beyond her personal success to create pathways for those still struggling in the shadows. Derek Willis, meanwhile, had become a cautionary tale in corporate circles, his name whispered as an example of what not to do. After his attempted sabotage of Lucia's translation work had gone public during a board inquiry into partnership negotiations, no major tech firm would touch him. His professional network had evaporated as people distanced themselves from someone who'd been exposed as both incompetent and vindictive. The last Lucia had heard, he was teaching business communication at a community college, ironically educating the very demographic he had once dismissed with such casual cruelty. She felt no particular satisfaction in his downfall, but she didn't mourn it either. Actions had consequences, and Willis had spent years taking credit for others' work while contributing little of value himself. Reeves himself remained unchanged at his core, driven by profit rather than principle, motivated by quarterly earnings rather than human welfare. But he had learned, through the simple arithmetic of success and failure, to recognize talent regardless of its packaging. He still referred to Lucia's rise as lightning in a bottle, a lucky break rather than an indictment of the systems that had kept her hidden. He still failed to acknowledge that those systems weren't accidents but choices, designed to benefit people like him while exploiting people like her, but actions spoke louder than words, and his willingness to reform hiring and promotion practices had real-world impact that extended beyond performative statements and diversity consultants. The company's workforce demographics had shifted noticeably in 6 months, not dramatically, but meaningfully. People of color now represented 32% of management positions, up from 11%. Women held 43% of director-level roles, up from 28%. These weren't revolutionary changes, but they were real ones, affecting real people's lives in concrete ways. As Lucia walked toward the boardroom, employees greeted her by name, some in English, others in Spanish or Mandarin, a few in languages she was still learning. Each interaction was a small bridge between worlds, a reminder that connection was possible when people chose to see each other rather than look through each other. She carried her father's jade pen, not as a secret talisman anymore, but as a visible symbol of her heritage and expertise. The pen had become something of a trademark, recognizable in meetings and video conferences as distinctly hers. Some executives had started bringing their own symbolic objects to meetings, though whether this was genuine tribute or corporate mimicry, Lucia couldn't quite determine and didn't particularly care. The board members rose when she entered the room, a gesture of respect that still surprised her even after 6 months. The corporate world had strict hierarchies and unwritten rules about deference and status, and standing for someone marked them as worthy of respect. That the most powerful people in the company now stood for the woman who had once cleaned their offices represented a shift that went beyond her personal success. "Good morning," she began in 3 languages, watching the board members' appreciative nods. Some of them had started taking language classes, recognizing that Lucia's multilingual approach wasn't just personal style but strategic advantage. Today we're going to discuss how embracing multiple perspectives transforms not just our culture, but our bottom line. Lucia clicked to her first slide, displaying the 32% market share increase alongside the 24% improvement in employee retention since implementing her initiatives. The numbers were undeniable, speaking a language that transcended culture and ideology. In boardrooms, profit was the universal translator. "Talent doesn't always arrive in expected packages," she continued, her voice steady and confident in a way that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. "But companies that recognize it, regardless of its wrapping, gain competitive advantage. The question isn't whether diverse perspectives add value. The question is whether we're willing to look for value in places we've been conditioned to overlook." She walked them through case studies, each one illustrating how employees who'd been invisible had contributed insights that executives had missed. The security guard whose understanding of African markets had influenced a product redesign that tripled sales in Nigeria. The customer service representative whose linguistic skills had identified a translation error in marketing materials that would have been offensive in 3 major markets. The maintenance worker whose engineering background had spotted a design flaw that could have cost millions in recalls. Every person in this company has knowledge, skills, and perspectives that we're not utilizing, Lucia said, clicking to her final slide. The Hidden Talents Initiative has identified approximately 200 employees with advanced degrees, specialized skills, or cultural knowledge that we're currently ignoring. 200 people whose potential we're wasting because we've decided that their current position defines their value. She let that sink in, watching faces shift as board members calculated what 200 unexploited resources represented. "My proposal is to expand the initiative company-wide, creating clear pathways for advancement that don't depend on traditional credentials or connections. We'll establish mentorship programs, provide professional development funding, and most importantly, create a culture where people are valued for what they can contribute rather than where they started." The jade pen moved confidently across her notes as she fielded questions, addressed concerns, and guided the company's leadership toward a future her father could only have dreamed of. One where bridges between worlds became highways of opportunity, where talent was recognized regardless of packaging, where invisible people became undeniable. Patricia Chen, who had become something of an ally, raised her hand. "The financial projections are compelling, but I'm curious about the cultural impact. How do we ensure this doesn't create resentment among existing management?" It was a good question, the kind that Lucia appreciated because it acknowledged real concerns. rather than pretending problems didn't exist. We frame it accurately, she replied. This isn't about taking opportunities from anyone. It's about recognizing that we've been operating with artificial constraints that hurt the company. When we limit advancement to people with specific credentials from specific schools with specific networks, we're not ensuring quality, we're ensuring homogeneity, which is the opposite of the diverse thinking that drives innovation. She pulled up another slide, showing research on cognitive diversity and company performance. The data is clear. Companies with diverse leadership teams at multiple levels outperform homogeneous ones across virtually every metric. This isn't idealism. It's mathematics. We're not asking you to sacrifice profit for principles. We're showing you how principles drive profit. The discussion continued for another 40 minutes, board members gradually shifting from skeptical questions to strategic planning. By the end of the meeting, Lucia had secured approval for a $5 million investment in the expanded Hidden Talents Initiative, funding that would transform lives and, not incidentally, generate returns that would more than justify the expense. As the meeting concluded and board members filed out, Victor Reeves lingered. "You've done something I didn't think was possible," he said, his tone thoughtful rather than congratulatory. "You've made social equity sound like a business strategy." "That's because it is a business strategy," Lucia replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "The social equity is just a bonus, though I'd argue that framing human dignity as a bonus rather than a baseline requirement is part of why companies make these mistakes in the first place." Reeves nodded slowly. "Your father would be proud of you, though I suspect he'd be less proud of me." It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement of wrongdoing Lucia had ever heard from him, and she appreciated the honesty even as she recognized its limitations. "My father believed people could change," she said carefully. "He believed systems could improve. He died before seeing much evidence of either, but he never stopped believing. I think he'd appreciate that you're willing to listen now, even if he'd wish you'd listened 10 years ago." "So do I," Reeves said quietly, then left without another word. Lucia returned to her office, exhausted but satisfied. Her phone showed a text from her mother. "Finished my first online engineering class, A-." "Not bad for someone who hasn't studied in 20 years? Proud of you, proud of me, proud of your father, who taught us both that knowledge illuminates," she smiled, feeling tears prick at her eyes. The jade pen caught the light again, throwing those small rainbows across her desk. She picked it up, held it close, and whispered, "We did it, Papa. We built the bridge, and we're going to keep building until no one else gets left behind." Through her office window, the city sprawled before her, full of people working invisible jobs, carrying invisible skills, building bridges that went unrecognized. She couldn't save them all. She couldn't fix every injustice or right every wrong, but she could build pathways, create opportunities, and prove that talent didn't arrive only in expected packages. The jade pen returned to its crystal stand, ready for tomorrow's meetings and next month's presentations, but its real work was already done. It had reminded Lucia who she was, connected her to her father's legacy, and helped her transform from invisible to undeniable. And that transformation, she was determined, was only the beginning. Lucia's story reminds us that talent, dedication, and worth aren't always visible on the surface. Sometimes they're hidden behind uniforms, accents, or circumstances that force people into survival mode rather than success mode. Sometimes the people we overlook are exactly the people we need. Has someone ever underestimated your potential the way Lucia's abilities were dismissed? Have you ever had a moment when you finally revealed your true value and watched assumptions crumble? Maybe you're still waiting for that moment, still carrying your version of a jade pen in your pocket, wondering if speaking up will bring opportunity or just new disappointment. I want to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. Tell me about the times you've been underestimated, the skills you've hidden, the moment you decided to step out of the shadows. Tell me about the bridges you've built or the ones you're still trying to construct. If Lucia's journey resonated with you, if her transformation from invisible to invaluable struck a chord, then do me a favor. Subscribe to RealTales. We tell stories like this every week, stories about people who refuse to stay invisible, who build bridges between worlds, who prove that talent exists everywhere if we're willing to look for it. Hit that like button if you've ever cleaned offices while understanding the conversations happening around you. Ring the notification bell so you never miss our uploads, because every week we bring you narratives that challenge assumptions and celebrate the resilience of people who've been counted out. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. That person working 2 jobs while pursuing a dream, that friend with skills nobody recognizes, that family member who speaks multiple languages but gets paid minimum wage. They need to know that their moment might be coming. that their bridge building matters, that their hidden talents have value, even if the world hasn't recognized it yet. Remember what Rafael Vega taught his daughter: words build bridges between worlds, and those bridges, those connections we forge despite obstacles and prejudice, despite being overlooked and underestimated, those bridges change everything. Your next chapter could be just one brave decision away, just like Lucia's was when she chose to speak up in that conference room. Maybe today is the day you pick up your jade pen, step out of the shadows, and show the world what you've been carrying all along. Real tales, where your potential becomes your power, where invisible becomes undeniable, where every story matters because every person matters. Thank you for watching, for listening, for caring about stories that matter. We'll see you next week with another journey that will make you think, feel, and maybe see the world a little differently. Until then, keep building your bridges, keep honoring your heritage, and keep believing that talent deserves recognition regardless of where it's packaged. Because somewhere right now, someone is polishing a conference table while understanding every word of a conversation that assumes she doesn't matter. And maybe, just maybe, today is the day she decides to speak.